So now we're going to use our same three examples. So we're going to practice graphing the mass and the volume of those samples. So if you remember, the first sample was wood. Our mass was almost 2 grams and our volume was 3 milliliters. That means wood is a substance that has a mass that is smaller than its volume. Another way of saying that is that wood is not very heavy for its size. You can have a big piece of wood that might not weigh very much. When we calculated its density, we got 0.65. To graph this data, we're going to graph the mass on the y-axis and the volume on the x-axis. And the reason is the formula for density is mass over volume. And in algebra, you might remember that usually the slope is calculated using rise over run, or change in y over change in x. So that's the reason why we're going to put the mass on the y-axis here. In this case, wood has a mass of 2. I'm going to go up 2, and it has a volume of 3. So we could plot its density over here. And if we could imagine a line passing from 0 through that dot, that would represent the density of wood, the slope of that line. Next, we're going to calculate the density of water, and in this case, I made up some data. If you had 10 grams of water, then you would expect that the volume of water would also be 10. Mass divided by volume would be 10 divided by 10, which would give you 1. Water is 1 gram per milliliter. So we're going to go up 1 and over 1, and that will be our point for water. And again, you could imagine a line running from the middle of your graph up through this point and then going up in this direction, and the slope of that line, which would be 1, would be the same as the density of water. And our last substance was iron. Iron had a mass of approximately 32 and a volume of 4. And so I just reduced the numbers so they would fit on our graph. In this case, we're going to imagine a smaller piece of iron that has a mass of 8 and a volume of 1. 8 divided by 1 is about 8. So for iron, we're going to go up to 8. And then we're going to go over 1. Okay. And again, if we were to draw lines that extend from the origin through these points, we would see that wood has a relatively low slope, and that would pass through all the points for different size pieces of wood. Water is going to have a slope of 1, which means that every time the mass rises by 1, the volume also rises by 1. And then finally, iron is going to have a very steep slope because it has 8 grams per milliliter, which means that its mass increases very rapidly as the size of the iron increases. And you can see that those 3 lines are very different. So we would say that the densities of these materials appear to be very different. If we had another piece of iron, we would expect that its point would fall on this line here. If we had another sample of water, we would expect that its point would fall on this line here. And if we had another sample of wood, we would expect it to fall on this line here. So just remember that density is the relationship between the mass and the volume. Another way of saying that is it's how heavy an object is for its size. So a small, heavy object like a piece of iron is going to have a high density, whereas an object that could be quite large without being very heavy is going to have a low density, and wood is a good example of that.